Industrialization. I know you're quite excited for your next installment here. We are going to talk about the Industrial Revolution. Before we can actually get into changes of industrialization, we have to go back and look at how were things done before. So we want to talk about why there wasn't very much food available. There wasn't a lot of food available because of inconsistencies of weather. And we don't have a lot of advances in farming. So this is labeled 17th century European agrarianism. Agrarian refers to someone who's a farmer or farming. So from these engravings, you can see who's doing the work. People, or maybe a horse, or they might have a tool, but it's a horse or ox, whatever you want to call it, and people. So I want you to keep in mind that horses, ox, cows, wherever they are, and a person, at this point, your fuel source are plants. You want to eat your horse or your cow, well, go ahead and do it. But the horse or the cow ate the plant, and they helped you with your farming techniques. So meat is actually not really available for most people. The upper class, yes, but not for the average person or the average peasant across Europe is what I would get across. Want to emphasize to you. This is a beautiful painting done by a French artist, Millet, and it's called The Gleaners. And these are the poorest people picking the gleaning from the fields, the last bits of the harvest. And it shows you how backbreaking sometimes harvesting. So harvest is done, and harvest, when this painting was done, would have been actually done by machine. But people are desperate looking for grains of wheat. So over the centuries, we want to understand that the crop productivity was fairly low, okay, their yield. I do want, we're not going to really cover the 1500s, but I want you to notice we're starting in the 1700s for this chapter, 1700s. The Industrial Revolution starts about 1750. In order for the Industrial Revolution to start, you have to have an agricultural revolution. The agricultural revolution is going to produce more food for people to have, so more people will live and not die. More people will be available to work in what we would call a factory. The more people are available to work, because we're going to have innovations on the farms, which meant you don't need every hand to work the farms in order to get your harvest. Took me a long time to get to that. I know, sorry. We want to understand that Britain and the Low Countries have phenomenal crop output. So look at that huge growth then between 1700 and 1800. So the British and the Low Countries, so the English or the British, whatever you want to call them here, and the Low Countries. Now the Low Countries are people today of the Netherlands and Belgium, or we call them the Dutch. Now they particularly have to have innovations in farming, because literally the Low Countries are below sea level. So they will push back the ocean waters with dikes and dams and do that to gain more land. With more land, you could grow more food. They will move into using larger fields, and they'll have innovations in farming, like using manure to fertilize the land. The British become the best students of the Dutch. And I got to tell you, the Dutch have a very large population. They have a global empire, too, because they're trading around the world with lands in Africa and also in Asia. The British eventually learn from the Dutch, though, and they bring their new techniques back to England. New techniques like using fertilizer, mixing the soils, and then look at some of these innovations from the English, from Townshend and Tull. So Lord Townshend's kind of interesting. And yes, he's a lord. He's a member of the nobility. And his nickname is really Turnip Townshend, because he said people should grow turnips. Now listen, I don't think I've ever eaten a turnip. I'm not sure if you have. But what I want you to understand is turnips, he's called Turnip Townshend because he realizes turnips, what they will do when you plant them, they will restore into their soil nitrogen. Nitrogen would have been depleted by other crops. So farming in this time, you take a plot of land and divide it into thirds. Farming prior to Turnip Townshend, you would have had, grain on plot A, corn on plot B, nothing on plot C. You leave part of your land empty, because if you grew food there all the time, you'd have a failed harvest. They learned, at least once or twice in a decade. So Turnip Townshend, don't leave that one plot of land empty, and that word is called fallow. Plant a nitrogen-restoring vegetable, like clover, alfalfa, turnip, or peas. I like peas. Turnips do not sound good to me, but if you planted the turnips, and even if I didn't want to eat them because I'm a picky little snobby person, maybe you could give your turnips to your ox or your cow or your horse, and they would produce more manure. So that's a win-win situation. So Turnip Townshend has an innovation of what I like to call nitro veggies, and that, by the way, is in your science books because I read it with my children. Jethro Tull is a different innovation of let's plant our seeds in a straight line. Our straight line will help us better with harvesting. Better harvest would mean more food. More food meant better crops to the people. This is all part of what we call an agricultural revolution. The real result of the agricultural revolution is more food and workers that are not needed on the farms. We have excess workers who will not be needed on the farms because they once had been needed, but now they don't need it because of these innovations. So here's small town life or village life in the Low Countries. There's some interesting paintings done. Kind of like your houses today, a little chaotic, people everywhere, huh? We see the Dutch here with their lace making. And then this gives us to, if you worked the land, you lived in your cottage. Now your cottage may have one tool here, and this looks like some sort of loom. And you have the husband and wife, you have the children there. So in the cottage, when you lived in your cottage, you might have also participated in this cottage system or this putting out system. And clearly this phrase putting out is done by some historian who does not teach high school kids. And they make me stand in front of the kids and say, let's talk about the putting out system. Well, in this case, the putting out system means a merchant would put out to these people in this picture a bale of raw wool. And then they take this machine and they would spin that wool into a coarse thread. This is all part of the textile process. So in terms of our textiles or fabrics of this time period, you're using mostly textiles or flax. I think flax is like a linen. Cotton's going to come with innovations come the end of the 1700s. But this is your putting out system. So here we have the raw wool given to the cottage people, and they have to scrib it, spin it, weave it, full it, and finish it. Not all in one spot, because look, in your cottage is very small, and your ox or your cow or your horse might have lived in here too with you, because you need them to help you work the land. Spinning particularly was a very time-consuming process. A lot of people had spinning machines. So the peasants could supplement their incomes by participating in this putting out system. They do it at night, and they do it in the wintertime. Merchants could avoid the high wages of the guilds in the urban centers. Merchants acquired capital. Merchants had extra capital to buy the raw materials, which will help them with more innovations. And then, why else do people do it? They could earn more money. If they earn more money, they could have their own household and become more independent. The disadvantage to this whole system would be sometimes it wasn't efficient. Even with paying these peasants, sometimes they took holidays. Eventually, though, the inefficiencies of this putting out system are going to lead to what you and I call the factory system, which is not a difficult concept for us, I don't think, where you have to come to work at one place, all the tools are under one roof, you work at this time for this long according to a manager. And then with water power being developed and steam power eventually, water power has always been around, but steam power, we're going to see some changes in how we produce things. So you can see these machines together under one roof, an early factory. Now, this extra food results in population changes. Again, the changes in population come at the end of the 1700s. Growth is typically fairly slow in population, but agricultural changes along with the end of the bubonic plague and things like that. We don't really have medical advances. We just had the end of the bubonic plague. And the bubonic plague ends because of a rat. One rat will push the other rat out, and so the rat that spread the disease will be gone. But population is going to grow. We see urban centers develop. We see particularly Paris and London. I believe London will not quite be 1 million people at the turn of the century, but they're getting there. You can see its rapid growth. We're going to see people heavily populated in some areas. With that comes textile production, metal production. Textile production is, again, your fabrics. Again, this is more artwork showing you how they depicted life at this time. Another thing to consider is the lower people. Were they free to do what they want, or were they controlled? And the beige color on this map shows they were all peasants. They were serfs. They were not peasants. They were not independent. So they were controlled in some manner. Now, see the pink states, they have full independence. They could do as they want. The blue states with Napoleonic era, and the green states as Napoleon's there. Okay, so let's keep going with innovations in the 1700s. What were the innovations, or what's going to happen here? Why is England able to do this? Well, England moves towards something called the enclosure movement. So let me show you a picture of enclosing the lands. I like to think of enclosing your leftovers with like Tupperware. You put your food in a container, you put edges all around it to contain it. Well, what happens with the enclosure movement, the rich will enclose their land. They want more land, they're going to buy from the parliament, they take the land from the peasant farmer. And then the well-to-do take this land and they're going to put into place innovative techniques. So went against hundreds of years of policies for the peasant farmer. So then farm workers will lose their job and they will migrate to the towns and cities for a new labor force. So here's again your picture. This started with Cromwell and the English Revolution in the 1650s. So this is a process that takes a long time. And I would argue like today, like we have very few open field areas, like our parks, our local parks. Those are places that we're allowed in, but no one owns it. But they're very small territories. But prior to say 1750, I'd argue most land was non-enclosed. It was free for anyone. We see Britain developing. Here's a bustling port, and we have Britain having a variety of raw materials which will be important for the Industrial Revolution: iron, copper, lead, tin. We see its foreign trade will start to grow, and we have a capitalist entrepreneur, or the nouveau riche, we start to call them. So with the agricultural improvements, we're going to have a population increase, okay, because more food's available. We see within the 1700s, almost doubling of population, which is a crazy rate, which results, what happens today is we have actually a lot of people on the earth. I'm not sure I'm willing to say it's too many people on the earth, but it's a concern for some people that some areas have too many people. We don't have enough resources for all these people today. And this has been a really recent development the last 3 centuries. So here, again, we see population skyrocket in the 1700s. But prior to that, it was a very slow growth and go up and down to an extent. So the revolution that comes about also in 4.1 here will be with coal and the steam engine. Okay, and the steam engine provides us what we call an energy revolution. So the steam engine's fueled with coal, and it solves this crisis. So for hundreds of years, who did the work? Remember those early sketches I showed you early in the slide about farming? It was people doing the work or their horse. Well, people and the horse, we both get our food from a plant, or we eat the animal, but the animal ate the plant. So we have a shortage of energy, so we realize how we can use this coal, which was an abundant supply, and let's harness in the steam engine. Watt will improve upon a steam engine done by actually this guy named Newcomb, and he makes it a commercial success. And now we have a plentiful supply of energy never seen before in history. Okay, so this coal then is also used to help make iron. Iron's used to make these new steam engines. You see steel production improve with the Darby family as they smelt the iron, separating it. Iron becomes less expensive. Steel becomes more easily to be made. And we have tons of innovations with steel production in the 1800s as it progresses. Britain particularly is a home for all this because she has a variety of factors that allow her to be the early innovators. She has natural resources like the coal deposits, rich coal deposits. She's close to water, no part of England's more than 30 miles from water. She has a labor force able to work in the factories because they're not needed on the farms because of their early agricultural innovations. They have capital to invest in these new machines. They have entrepreneurs, and the government didn't restrict people's status in life. So there was an open class system, or really no rigid class system. So business was encouraged there. I'm not sure I'd say there's no class system because there is a class system. It's just more open, and people are allowed to improve their lot in life. Okay,